Welcome to our panel on growing a sales enablement team. I'm very excited to be joined by our panelists today who are going to be talking about how they're growing their functions at their organizations and uplifting their functions as a whole. So I'd love for each of you to just go around, introduce yourself, say your name, your company. Let's start with Haley.
Hi, I'm Haley Katzman. I am with HighSpot. We are a sales enablement platform and work very closely with Sales Enablement Pro. I'm the Vice President of Revenue Strategy here at HighSpot. And in that role, I lead both our revenue enablement and our revenue operations teams, which is about a team of about 30 people now, and have grown the team from scratch over the past 4 years, but I've been with the company for about 6. So here to help in any way possible and help people build out their own enablement teams within their organization.
Hi, everyone. My name is Whitney Seek, and I'm Senior Director of Enablement at Outreach. Outreach is a sales engagement platform that helps to make your entire revenue team more effective, and right now is being touted as the #1 sales tool according to G2 Crowd, which I think is pretty cool. I'm a month in and loving the challenge of working at a super fast-paced, hyper-growth organization, and to that avail, I actually have 2 open roles: Sales Enablement Manager and Onboarding Manager.
Yes, hello, my name is Patrick Merritt. I'm the Director of Worldwide Field Enablement at Sumo Logic. Sumo Logic's a continuous intelligence platform that gives you observability and security solutions across to your entire organization.
Hi, everyone. I'm Georgia Ortiz, the Head of Global Sales Enablement at Lever. I think I've met most of you or have seen you at different conferences. Excited to be here. Lever is an application tracking system where we really try and connect the human meaning behind good roles and just make it a lot better experience for people when they're looking for new roles.
So we have very limited time on our panel today, so we're going to jump right into these questions. The first one we have here is, what was your path to sales enablement, and how have you grown the function out at your organization? So Haley, let's start with you.
Sure. So my path to sales enablement was interesting in that 6 years ago, I joined HighSpot, a sales enablement company. So I was very quickly put into the space in the industry, which quite frankly was in a very different place than it is today. I've absolutely loved seeing how it's evolved. But my path into a sales enablement leadership role at the company was really interesting. I actually built our inside sales team from about 0 to 100 people in the first 3 years. And as part of that, really developed our go-to-market strategy. So what our ideal customer profile, our buyer personas, really how we wanted to take our product to market, which, you know, when you have a large team that you have to teach all that information to, and being in the enablement space, it's such a passion of mine to teach and help others be successful. So I got into it by basically building out the go-to-market strategy, operationalizing it through our systems and tools, and that really teed me up to step into a role where I'm leading enablement and operations for our entire revenue teams globally. And the way that we've grown the function has just been phenomenal. We have a center of excellence model. So like I said, we have about 30 people on the team, and we support all of our customer facing teams. So, you know, sales development, AEs, AMs, services, all customer facing teams. And we have been able to grow the function, I think, from being, you know, what many of you might be experiencing from something that's a little bit more reactive when you don't have as many resources, to being a very strategic team that's data driven and really has a seat at the table as it relates to driving the key initiatives for the business. So it's been a really, really exciting journey. I've learned a lot of what works, what doesn't work, and happy to share that.
And Whitney?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually started my career in sales. I was a sales leader who loved training my teams. It was one of those things where I wanted to bottle that feeling that when you would have fun, it didn't feel like work in the training environment, and then they go back and apply it and see the impact. And so as soon as I recognized that that was my passion, I relentlessly pursued enablement. And I started my own company where I recognized my personal development opportunity to understand scale. I was creating custom and bespoke content for every customer. And so that actually pushed me to join a Big Four organization and work in their center of excellence, which was geared towards learning and development for sales. And there I learned a lot about the frameworks and this programmatic approach to understand, what's already existed and how to scale for a really large company. And so that gave me the skill set that when I entered the SaaS space, I was able to have that entrepreneurial side still, where I was able to build the function from scratch, but still have some of that guidance and structure from proven methodologies to implement successfully.
As you've scaled your respective teams, what are the key qualities that you look for in a sales enablement candidate?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and there's a lot of things that I look for, but when I'm looking for someone new to join the team, first of all, it's really just curiosity and their interest in learning things new. This is not a role where you can just come in with whatever experience you have and say, yep, that's all I need to do. I can just rely on what I know today. You have to continually learn. And so someone who is eager to do that and interested and curious about new things, that's really key. Combined with that, I'm looking for a bit of fearlessness because especially in a smaller organization, you have to do a lot in a sales enablement role. You have to, if you want to be successful, be able to say no and make it stick, because you can't do everything all at once. And you have to take on new things that you may not have done before, and just be confident that I'm going to try this and we're going to see if it works. And if it doesn't, we're going to use that as an experience to learn. I look for people who are generalists and specialists, in the sense that they have a general understanding of a lot of things. In particular, the more you know about sales organizations and structure and frankly, how to run a business, that's really useful. But you need to have some special skills and, again, be willing to be ready to become a specialist in an area if you aren't yet, because that's just what the nature of the role requires, right? Mm-hmm. And then, on top of all of that, that the unicorns I'm looking for, let me add on top of that I'm looking for someone with enthusiasm, because you really have to be a cheerleader, both to yourself, but to your team, and it helps that enthusiasm, can grow on the people that you're trying to help out, right? Which at the end of the day, it's the individual sales reps, right? You have a lot of different kind of customers, so to speak, as a leader in sales enablement. But at the end of the day, if your sales reps aren't being successful, that's not winning. So those are kind of 4 key qualities I'm looking for.
Haley?
It's funny, a lot of the same things. Curiosity was one that was first on my list. I also have empathy. I think the ability for someone to be able to do really good discovery and step into the shoes of whoever their internal customer and external customer as well that they are enabling is extremely important. I also said tenacity, kind of the fearlessness that Patrick talked about. You just have to be someone that gets stuff done and can push through the noise. Something that I really look for is, and this might sound kind of basic, but a really great communicator, both up, across, and down. My enablement team works, very closely with a lot of our executives. And so it has to be someone that can push back to someone that might be 3 or 4 levels more senior than them. And really get, maybe someone from marketing and someone from sales that aren't in alignment together to be able to align on what we're trying to accomplish. That's not an easy thing to do. It also kind of plays in with the fearlessness, but they have to be able to do that well. Creativity and innovation. I think enablement is evolving so much. And if you even just think about everything that's going on right now, you have to be able to switch on a dime and come up with new innovative ways to be able to enable the team. So I love when people have out of the box ideas. especially for us, since we are a very fast growing company, being agile and thriving in a changing environment. When I'm interviewing candidates, there's plenty of people that don't like change. They like structure. They like things to not change for a year. And I'm like, for this role and at least our company, that's not going to work. You have to like thrive, not just like be okay with it, but thrive in a changing environment. And then similarly to what Patrick said with the enthusiasm piece, I have an optimist because, you know, it's kind of sometimes one of those jobs where, you know, unless something's going wrong, you don't necessarily hear about it. And so you have to be that optimist, both from the way in which you really motivate and persuade the teams that you're enabling, but also just in your day-to-day work. It's such a cross-functional visible role that optimism can be contagious, and the opposite can have a pretty bad effect. I think it's important to note too that there are a lot of things that I think are important to be successful in the role that aren't necessarily something that I look for when I'm interviewing. I think they're things that I can teach. But the things that I mentioned before are things that I think are a little bit more kind of, you know, intrinsic, that, you know, you can teach, but not as much. So those are some of the things I look for.
Yeah, I think it's that, I mean, y'all are nailing it, right? I think we're all saying a lot of the same things in a little bit of a different perspective. The way that I phrase it is I want someone who's got the balance of this entrepreneurial mindset and a philanthropic spirit. And I think that that's hard to find someone who can really straddle both. And so that relates to what y'all are saying from those consultative skills as well as that empathy perspective. I describe our internal team as an internal consulting business, meaning you've got to have those skills around project management, stakeholder engagement. And something that I haven't heard yet, but I'm super passionate about, is that data and measurement component, because I find that in order to make that shift that Haley was talking about earlier from reactive to more of that strategic function, you've got to be able to define your impact. And that's a skill set in itself. That I think people really need to be able to demonstrate on the interview itself.
The last thing I would say is for anyone listening, they might be concerned that one individual has all of these miraculously wonderful talents. But the reality is, I would like to have all of those talents, right? The unicorn, exactly. And I think that one of the things that we do as leaders is we look to build a team that is complementary. We look at our own skill set and our growth edges, and in the people that we're looking for. As you build out a team, you prioritize what aspect of that, you know, unicorn that you really want to double down on. And then over time, you're able to build that team, and having that diversity of thought and diversity of experience on one team makes us all better. And then we start to learn from each other. So if you have one member that's a little bit not as skilled in the data and the metrics, by working with someone that is, all of a sudden they start to build their own business acumen and data acumen. So it's really important to understand that everyone brings so much value, and that being confident and comfortable in what it is that you bring to the team. And then it's the sales enablement leadership and company that kind of begins to build out this ideal group of individuals that, you know, for all of us, we know small teams, but that are well built are just moving mountains when it comes to enablement efforts.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would just echo that, Georgia, is the filling those gaps, right? I mean, we all know we have our own gaps, and so selfishly, you want to fill some of those because there's things you don't like to do because you're not very good at it, or you don't feel you're good at it, and filling those gaps with the other individuals is really key to growing, I think, any successful team, but even more so in sales enablement, because you do have small teams, and when you can be as a team, you can be strong across a lot of those areas, then you can be so much more successful.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that that's an important lens to look through. The challenge becomes you have to balance also looking at the short term versus the long term. And so sometimes you're filling gaps on your teams based on skill sets and abilities. But if your team is not very large, you want to make sure that you're looking at what's the long term, 3 to 5 years, 10's probably long, but 3 to 5 years from now, what is that person going to need to be developing and doing? I think that future perspective is important too.
So remote interviews have really become this new normal. So how has this new virtual environment really impacted the way that you assess candidates? Whitney, I'd love to hear from you.
Is it weird that I actually like it a little bit? Like I like having Zoom calls in the early stages. I feel like there's more of a personal connection when you're doing that versus those phone screens that are a typical part of the process. I also think that for enablement in particular, like let's talk about the generalist role. I know we're all describing different functions on the team, but from the generalist role, there's typically some sort of presentation component to the overarching process. And managing a panel remotely is super challenging. So I think it's a real testament to the skill of the enablement leader if they're able to do that well and have a standout performance by demonstrating unique engagement techniques. I think that that reflects someone who can grow with the business because people are shifting away from having the high level, the high percentage of in-person trainings. And so to accommodate both shows that you're like well-rounded in that aspect.
How has the current healthcare and economic crisis really impacted the way that you're thinking about what you look for and who you hire? Patrick, I'd love to start with you.
Yeah, I think it's really combined with the way that we're sort of forced to interview right now. Is that I would over I'm going to overemphasize how someone performs in that remote interview because that's the way they're going to be interacting a majority of the way going forward. So if they present themselves really well over the meeting, if they come across and they speak well, they're enthusiastic, that's what they're going to have to do to engage with these teams. And you know, doing it internally, you get a little bit, people cut you a little bit of slack, right? But if you're bad at it, or you're sort of if you're an inactive participant, if you're just there, then you're just not going to be successful in that role. So I think in my thinking, while I don't have any open roles, I'm a little jealous. Very soon I may. So as I've been thinking about it and prepping for it, it's like, well, how do the things that I look for in a candidate, how does that change? And I think for me, that's the biggest is how do they present themselves? How well can they engage others via, doing Zoom meetings, right? For me, that's the big shift. Otherwise, I think all the other qualities, that all still applies.
Ironically, I think it might make it a little easier because, whether you're on Zoom, you're in front of a classroom, you're writing content, you're sending out emails, your ability to connect at an emotional level with people is paramount to your success in sales enablement and any kind of training and enablement. So I think that by kind of removing all of the noise and letting people be creative, right, through the engagement virtually, can you still connect? Because if you can do that through a screen and being remote, then we know that eventually when we're all back together post-COVID world, it's going to be fine. And not everybody does really well in interviews. And sometimes I think that we miss out on incredible candidates because of in-person anxiety or expectations. And I feel that we're all almost on our home turf, but coming together in these interviews. And so there's no, other team turf advantage, whatever that's called. But that's how I think that the experience can be. And technology is further facilitating that so that people can show their personality enthusiasm by their backgrounds or by what they wear or how they express themselves. So it's a new way of showing your creativity and your ability to rise above, whatever obstacle comes your way, because all of us have had technology issues as we've done trainings or things that break or people that don't show up or catering that shows up in the middle of a really deep, meaningful conversation you're having with the team. So yeah, I think it's actually an opportunity, and It's all about the mindset that people come. And so that's another factor actually in what we generally look for is, do they have a growth mindset? If I'm on an interview and something goes south, can you recover? It's okay. Assume something's going to go wrong. And,
And how do you react?
and how do you react? Because
Yeah.
it's the reaction that will determine how people will handle the stress, handle the rejection that you get in sales enablement when you work really hard on a program and it bombs horribly, right? And it's that resilience is the word I think I'm looking for. And you can get a lot of that from conversations and actually purposefully breaking things just to see how people deal with it.
I think, y'all share a lot of great points around the qualities required there. There's also a logistical component to this that I'm getting a lot of questions about from candidates, which is like, are you open to remote now? Mm-hmm. And I think that companies are still balancing that strategy. So I wanted to call it out, and I think this might be the appropriate question for it. At Outreach, we're still really bullish about hiring with a post-pandemic future in mind. Mm-hmm. And so, not talking about outreach, what I'm hearing from a lot of my industry peers is that they are becoming more open to this remote work style, to having remote candidates involved, which opens up an entire new candidate pool. The other side that I'm hearing a lot about, which I thought was interesting, is that contract roles seem to be coming more to the forefront. Because there's so much uncertainty right now, there's opportunities to bring people in on a contract basis. And I would just recommend to those listening that are looking for jobs, like, don't shy away from those, because you can prove yourself in a contract role and make yourself invaluable and set the precedent that it can be done no matter where you are in the country. So just a different perspective on the same question.
The sales enablement function has really grown and evolved greatly in recent years. So how do you see the function really continuing to evolve, and how will these changes really impact how you structure and grow your own teams?
Sure. I mentioned a couple of themes before. I think one is that I'm seeing more and more teams, and we did this a couple of years ago, shifting from just focusing on sales enablement to all revenue or customer facing teams. So anyone who's engaging with the customer, they need to be enabled. And then what that oftentimes ends up kind of forcing is teams to move from a very siloed model to more of a center of excellence, which is what we have. I report up to our CEO, not under sales or under marketing or under any other function. So kind of along that line, I do see enablement really shifting from being reactive and tactical to much more of a strategic function that has a seat at the table. I think it's so important to be able for companies to take their strategies and connect those to what execution looks like for your customer facing teams. And most companies like completely fail at executing their go-to-market or key initiatives. Strategies. A lot of times that's because people don't know what the strategies are, because maybe they weren't right, but usually it's the case that it's because they weren't able to execute them internally. And so enablement really can be that bridge between strategy and execution. And I think combining that with another theme around being very data-driven and analytical, not only from an enablement perspective to be able to demonstrate and prove enablement's impact on the business, but also being a really great stakeholder to provide insights to those stakeholders that you're working with around what's working and what's not working and how you can optimize that strategy. And then this is like a little bit of a separate piece, but I do think that at least we are focusing on this heavily. And I do think that you'll start to see this type of role more and more is around manager enablement. I am a firm believer that enablement cannot go straight from enablement to the ICs. You have to go through the managers. They need to be enabled. They need to be bought in. They need to be part of the process. They need to coach and reinforce. They need to be accountable. And in order to do that, you have to be very intentional about enabling them. And it can't just be like, hey, here's the training or the session that we're going to be giving your team next week. It actually has to be enabling them, right? And so I think that you're going to start to see more and more teams focus on that lens of manager enablement, maybe even have dedicated roles to enabling managers across the team. So a couple of different themes. I'm really excited of where it's going, and a lot of the companies that we work with are doing a lot of those things that I just talked about. So I'm really excited to see those things coming to fruition.
I just want to like double tap, like, put a heart by that whole comment. I think what you're talking about there is really describing that trend of moving from a support role, which I think is how it's defined. Like, I ask my team to eliminate support from their vocabulary because that's the reactive component.
Yeah.
And you want to be that strategic business partner and inform based on those insights. I love everything that you said there. And I think it begs the argument, which is like, I hear this debate a lot in our industry around, is chief enablement officer the next CEO?
Heck yes, absolutely.
Right? So I think that that's a really important conversation for us to continue to have. And it's a really heavy debate right now with great points on both sides around the value of promoting that function. And I think we've got to band together and sort of make that movement around how do we become more strategic. And it's roles like you described around manager enablement that help demonstrate that value. These are things that I'm seeing a lot of my industry peers talk about. So I just want to clarify, it's not something that I'm doing yet, but I think that is really exciting and based on the needs of the business might come up. One is like roles in enablement that are dedicated to efficiency and effectiveness. So y'all talked about how like you've got to build based on gaps. And if that data and measurement is a gap on the team, having a dedicated function to actually map the progress of your programs and help to identify through that analysis phase, like where can we get the biggest impact at scale, I think are really interesting. Yeah. The other is I've seen some teams dedicate someone to methodology. I think that's really cool because oftentimes you find that methodologies fall flat because they don't have someone that weaves it through the way of life and that it truly becomes something where everyone's speaking the same language. Having someone dedicated and owning that helps to drive that process. And that finally leads me to like the last point of where I'm seeing some really unique trends is you start to see a lot of enablement roles that are turning into more of these internal change agents, PMO type of roles, more of like even expanding beyond the go-to-market into business enablement. And I think that that's all really interesting and exciting for what we're doing to develop this industry.
Yeah, I think that the whole concept of the chief enablement officer, the question was, how do we see it growing? I always think about, well, where would I like it to be? Because I've been doing this a long time, and that conceptually, I love that idea, because at the end of the day, to a key point Haley said, we have a lot of go-to-market plans, but we always fall down in the execution. Yep. And I see from a strategic standpoint, I always look at the enablement function as, okay, how do we actually just go execute? What's the go-to-market execution, right? And how do we transform that plan into something that is not only executable, but is done well, right? And how do you continue to optimize that? And that's the manager enablement and coaching and reinforcing there. I mean, there's so much more opportunity for enablement to drive and help grow the business if they are given that strategic support and that role. And I if you look at the manufacturing industry and think about chief operating officers, what are they designed to do? They're designed to optimize the functions of the business, right? And I see some parallels in what you do from enablement, and that's where I'd really like to see it go, right? That's what gets me excited about continuing to do this job is to help push it in that direction.
Yep.
But there's two things we have to do in order to make that happen. It's speak the language of our C-level executives. So talk the talk, right? Yep. And then generate enough interest at the board level. I think that's got to be the crucial component. They've got to want to hear from us on what that plan is in order to be able to do it. And sometimes in some companies, you're cut out of those board level conversations. So I would say for other leaders on the call, definitely drill into what is your team talking about with the board
Yep.
and how is what you're doing relating to that?
Yep. I always have 2 slides at the board meeting that talks about our enablement and operations strategy. And most of our board has said that's not something that they see very frequently. But when they've seen it, it's the revenue engine. So how could you not be asking questions about how efficient and effective your teams are? Because all those numbers around consistent performance and revenue and growth, like, you need to know how efficient and effective your teams are being set up. And so now that's become, you know, a standard kind of template as part of our board meeting. So happy to share if anyone kind of wants that as a template.
Yeah, Haley,
You know,
that's awesome. I would say that those slides have been shown. The problem is enablement hasn't been the name on those slides. I mean,
Oh,
I
it's for me.
think
Yeah.
we've all had, you know, sales leadership, you know, the CRO comes to you, hey, can I get stats on this? And then the head of marketing comes to you, can I get stats on this? And then the head of HR. And so all of a sudden your program is feeding into all these other things. But
Yeah.
that's why I believe that for those looking at a sales enablement role, our ability to be viewed as strategic is absolutely dependent on the value that we're delivering in the eyes of our sales leadership, which is why the sales management enablement is one of the most important things that we can do, because those frontline managers rarely get the kind of support, training, and enablement that they need.
Yeah.
I also believe that the closer alignment you have to sales is how we really make an impact, because then you are viewed as a true partner and part of the team. When the reporting structures are otherwise, that creates a little bit more challenge for us to be viewed in that strategic, because you're having to then jockey for that role. So Haley, that is just such a wonderful thing to see that already happening.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Yeah. And I would actually even say something that I found really successful at, you know, not giving slides over to people, but getting me in the room presenting on it, is actually going beyond the sales leader and getting buy-in from my CEO and my CFO. And those are the 2 people that are advocating. Of course, there's sales leader as well, but those are the 2 people that are advocating, you know, that I'm in the room, but also that we're presenting on those topics, because to your point, they truly do believe that it's something valuable for the board to hear about, because we're truly making an impact on the business. I mean, that's what, at the end of the day, if people don't think you're making an impact, you're not in the room. So you have to show that you're making an impact and be able to demonstrate and articulate that. So I do think that, you know, I don't see as many enablement teams talking to head of finance or even, you know, CEO. And you have to have that tenacity and fearlessness, but, you know, get yourself in the room is what I would say.
Yep.
Amen. Sponsors. That's absolutely. And frankly, if we put our money where our mouth is, right, and we are training our salespeople to multi-thread and to have these kinds of conversations and to have business impact and understand business value, it starts with us, you know, and then we model the behavior. So it's not that it's hard, it's that we need to step out from the support idea, because the value and what is viewed as strategic is our ability to foresee. And I think everyone on this panel generally prides themselves on being able to deliver before things are asked, because we're looking at the trends and we're able to foresee what's happening. And even if we can't deliver it right away because the company's not ready, because the team's not quite ready, believe you me, we're behind the scenes building that infrastructure so that when it comes, like, oh gosh, here it is, you know? So I think that that's something. And if you think about the qualities of the people that we're looking for, that's why. Because you've got to be curious, you've got to be creative, you got to be emotionally intelligent and empathetic and understanding. You've got to be quick and smart and fun and organized. There's so many things that you have to be, and not necessarily all at once. You just have to know when to lean into a particular style or need based on the ever-changing, you know, dynamic of what is needed in that week. So that was fun.
Or that day.
That day, you're right. Yes, yes. Much like rearing children, the days are long and the years are short.
What advice do you have for anyone who's currently looking for their next role in sales enablement?
Oh gosh. So when I think about this, and the advice that I've given in the past is, I'm a big proponent of reading. Read as much as you can, and not just about enablement. I think understanding behavioral psychology, organizational psychology. So much of what we do today in this role is change management. And so if people are going into sales enablement thinking it's all about just sales and understanding the technical aspects or the sales motions, that is absolutely important. For those of us that have come up to this role through sales, we certainly have an advantage because we lived those motions. But the reality is that today's sales person really has to be a consultant. They absolutely have to understand change management and how the brain processes decisions, because today's buyer has so much more information than we do. We know all the stats, the numbers, the research. And so our role as sales enablers is to help the salespeople really understand what they need to know so that they can sit back and listen and be ready to support that buyer in making the right decision. So I think for people thinking about sales enablement, you should really start getting curious about the methodology behind what makes sales really successful, and get curious about, is this something that I can see myself doing, right? If you think that it's a glamorous job, and a lot of people, because you get that sometimes where people think, oh, cool, sales enablement, you get to meet with all these people and you get to do these presentations, and they get really, yes, it can be exciting and it's wonderful, but there's a lot of grunt work. There's a lot of rolling up your sleeve. There's a lot of disappointment. There's a lot of judging. There's a lot of failures and people just not getting what you're trying to do. And so it's easier if you come from a sales role because you're used to that rejection, honestly.
Yep.
And sometimes it can be an incredibly thankless job, but it is tremendously rewarding. And I would say shadow your sales enablement person, work closely with your field marketing people, your product marketing people. I think that when you think about what sales enablement does and translating what our marketing group is putting out to market into what is tangible and what can we scale and just bring to market collectively so that we're amplifying that message. Do you want to do that? Is that something that excites you?
Yep.
Every person on this panel, we're different in the sense that we approach sales enablement differently. We might have different backgrounds, but the one thing that we share is that we are probably overly passionate. We absolutely love what we do. It's really hard to say no because we love what we do and we love sales. And so if you go into this role thinking it's going to be a checkbox experience and you're a really good trainer or you can build some cool content, you might not be happy. But if you're passionate and you love sales and you can get excited about some really nerdy stuff, then yeah, it's definitely something you should look into.
I think from a different perspective of those like on the job market right now versus internal mobility and like determining that this is the right path, I think it goes back to what Georgia was saying a second ago around how we in enablement need to use the skills that we coach our sales teams on. Same when you're looking for a role, right? Like use the skills that you've taught your sales teams to sell yourself in this job market. Do your discovery, do your due diligence and research on the company, on the people that are on that team. Create personalized introductions and tailor your messaging through the interview process to the different personas you're interacting with. Because we've highlighted that this is one of the most collaborative roles. You're going to be interacting in the interview process with people that have very different vantage points of enablement. So your sales leaders, your sales reps, your enablement team members, right? Like everyone's going to look at it a different perspective. You need to think about that when you're getting on the call with folks. I would also say like articulate your value, right? We tell our sellers to talk about the return on investment. What are those impact stories that you can share that have metrics associated with them that socialize your success in your career? I think that those are really the key elements that I would offer as advice to someone who's looking to get into the role right now.
Yeah, I would just add maybe two things quickly. One is master the art of feedback from three dimensions: giving it, receiving it, and seeking it out. I think if you're early in your career, one of the things that I see people miss is that they don't ask for feedback. Like I still to this day, I did, a presentation and training, for our entire sales team this morning. The minute after, I'm like, how'd it go? What was bad? I don't even want to know what went well. How could it be improved? You have to ask for feedback, because when you're in a partnership role and it's not your manager or your manager's manager, people are apprehensive to proactively give you feedback because they don't think it's their place to do so. And if there is critical or constructive feedback and you're not hearing it, then ultimately you're not going to be building the best relationship, or potentially not delivering, the best results to the teams that you're working with. So seek out feedback. The other one that I would say is master the art of prioritization. When you get into this role, you will have 5 million trillion till the end of time requests and things that need to get done. Like it will be never ending. And the art of learning how to say no and how to prioritize and how to get alignment around those priorities is something that will just quite frankly keep you sane. So I would definitely give that as a piece of advice.
So we love to end all of our panels with one key takeaway from our audience. So if you had one key takeaway for everyone today, what would that be? Whitney, why don't you kick us off?
I would say hone your impact story. You've heard me talk about it in almost every answer, but I want to hear in the interview process comprehensive, compelling stories around what's worked well. I want it to share the purpose, the process, and the payoff of those key initiatives that you've been a part of, and clearly articulate your role in that process. I often find myself having to ask a lot of follow-up questions because a lot of those details are left out. So that would be my advice to folks who are interviewing for roles.
Georgia?
I agree 100% with Whitney. I think that the impact story is probably one of the most important things that you really need to understand, how to communicate what you do. I also think really clarify what your point of view is, because a lot of times in these interviews, it's difficult to differentiate whether you executed on someone else's idea, which is still okay, right? But be clear in what your point of view is, because what enablement folks have to deliver today is a very strong point of view. We are not just here to execute. We are being asked for our vision and our point of view, and to distill insights from everything that we hear, see, and read. And so a person's ability to have a point of view is going to be incredibly paramount. So practice getting comfortable expressing it in a way that is authentically yours.
Patrick?
So those are two great ones, and I think this builds on it. And in particular, if you're going to interview with me, be prepared where this question is that I always ask, tell me about a project or program that you were involved driving that wasn't successful, and what did you learn from it? It's there's so many things that we have to do. Getting that feedback on what we've done, and in particular when something hasn't gone well, you've got to learn something from that, so that the next time you're doing something different, hopefully it works, but that you're trying something else. And I always see I think sometimes it's really hard for people to articulate telling a story about a project that I don't want to tell you about things that didn't work well, but that's where I see, and often that's where I see the differences in candidates I've interviewed, is how they respond, and whether or not what they learn from it is really kind of authentic. And so be prepared for that. I think it's, look, in sales, you don't win every deal, right? And you should be learning from the sales you lose. Same thing with sales enablement. You're not, every project you work on is not going to be successful, but if you can learn from that, you're going to increase your chances of success.
Absolutely. And Haley?
Yeah, so I'll take kind of the perspective for those that might be listening that are currently in an enablement role and looking to advance their career. I would say, in short, be your own best advocate. I think that it is so important to be able to, kind of what we were talking about earlier, be able to articulate the story and the impact of what you're doing. And so I always kind of put in people's mind, like, you should always be building your internal resume, because what that kind of makes you do is, before you even start a project or a program, you need to start with the end goal in mind and how you're going to measure success, so that at the end, you're able to articulate that story and advocate for yourself within the organization. If you get stuck in that, just kind of reactive fire drill kind of, motion, it's going to be really hard for you to advocate to yourself. And, a year, 2 years can go by and you're like, what did I even do? I don't even know. And so when you really have that, mindset of, how would this show up on my resume? How am I going to tell the story? It will kind of put a different frame when you're approaching new projects, programs, within your role.
So I think that this has been such a great discussion. Thank you to all of our panelists today. And thank you to our audience. Thank you for attending this session. And during these economic times, we really want to make sure that sales enablement professionals have ample opportunity to gain visibility with hiring organizations and really continue their professional development with our sales enablement certification courses. So to aid those that are seeking employment during these tough times, you can log into your profile on Sales Enablement Pro and go to your account settings. Select yes under open to new opportunities, and you will be added to our members seeking careers page. And you'll also receive a complimentary code to take the certification courses. And thank you again for attending the first ever Sales Enablement Career Strategy Workshop and Fair.